All right, so picture this. It's 1917, and World War I is raging on.
Hmm.
And then just try and imagine an explosion so powerful that it just wipes out an entire city.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hard to even picture, right? Well, that's exactly what happened in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Right.
A total disaster that, really left its mark on history.
Yeah.
And you might be surprised to know, this event, I mean, it was the biggest man-made explosion before, the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
It had a crazy impact on things like, medicine and technology. I mean, it shaped the world we're living in now. So are you ready to dive into this?
Absolutely. It's amazing how something that seems like it's, stuck in the past can still have so much to teach us today. So today, let's, peel back the layers of this Halifax explosion and see what's there. Not just the awful event itself, but how it, rippled out and changed things.
So to really set the scene, we got to go back to World War I, right? Halifax was this bustling port city, super important for, shipping troops and supplies over to Europe. But being so important like that, well, it had a dangerous side too.
Yeah.
That constant threat of German U-boats, basically, submarines lurking around the Atlantic, just waiting to, take out Allied ships.
And that's key to understanding what led to the Halifax explosion.
Okay.
These U-boats, they forced the Allies to be super careful. Often they had to, carry dangerous cargo in secret because, well, they didn't want to be a target.
Right. Okay. So it's December 6, 1917, just a normal day in Halifax, right?
Right.
And we've got these eyewitness accounts that, paint this really vivid picture of life in the city that morning. Like 5-year-old Kay McLeod, for example. She's at home, totally unaware of what's about to happen.
Yeah. Her story, it really captures how normal everything was before the explosion. I mean, she later remembered the smallest details, like what she was wearing, how her mom was, making this big pot of baked beans for her sister's birthday party.
Wow. It's hard to imagine that such an ordinary scene could be, just shattered by something so chaotic.
Yeah, it's a pretty chilling contrast, right? Baked beans and then a sudden disaster.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, out in the harbor, you've got these two ships on a collision course.
Right.
The Norwegian ship, Emo, is trying to leave port, but it ends up in the wrong shipping lane, and it's heading straight for this French freighter, the Mont Blanc.
And this is where things get really dangerous. The Mont Blanc, see, it was secretly carrying this massive load of explosives, over 3,000 tons of it, all headed for the war effort in Europe. It was basically, a floating time bomb.
Can you imagine the tension on both of those ships as they, realize they're going to crash? It must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. The Emo slams right into the Mont Blanc, and, well, it starts a fire that just spreads like crazy. The crew on the Mont Blanc, they knew how dangerous their cargo was, so they abandoned ship. They're, jumping into the freezing water, swimming for their lives. Wow. And back on land, the city's firefighters, they're racing towards the harbor, right?
Right.
Led by Billy Wells, in the city's only motorized fire truck.
Just imagine seeing this huge fire from a distance, flames hundreds of feet high and this billowing smoke. Billy later said it was like a blaze going up 500 or 600 feet in the air.
And he's rushing towards this scene, totally unaware of the real danger.
Yeah.
He and his team are they're just thinking about putting out a fire, right? They have no clue that they're dealing with a ship full of explosives.
And tragically, it seems like nobody on shore knew what the Mont Blanc was really carrying. The crew, in all the panic, they hadn't been able to, get the word out about the danger.
So Billy and his team, they get closer and closer, and they see the Mont Blanc drifting towards the pier.
Right.
They scramble to connect their hoses, trying desperately to put the flames out. But it's just too late.
Yeah.
At 9:04 a.m., the unimaginable happens. The Mont Blanc explodes, and that's where we'll pick up in part 2. What happens next is what's unbelievable. We'll hear about the harrowing experiences of survivors like Kay McLeod and Billy Wells.
And we'll also dig into what happened after the explosion, the investigation, and the incredible advances in, medicine and technology that came out of this tragedy.
Yeah, it's really something.
Yeah.
So make sure you come back for part 2 to hear all about it.
It's going to be good. I mean, the force of that explosion, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen.
Yeah.
Think about it. A shockwave so strong, it just flattened almost every building within 2 kilometers.
It's mind-blowing, that kind of destruction.
Windows were shattered miles away, 50 miles away. And the sound, people heard it over 250 miles away, even parts of Cape Breton Island.
That's incredible.
It is.
So we were talking about Kay McLeod, that little girl, 5 years old, at home when it happened.
Right.
What was it like for her?
Well, she was knocked off her feet by the blast. Imagine, you're just a kid, and suddenly there's this chaos all around, plaster falling from the ceiling, wires sparking, and her mother's screaming at her to, stay put.
Oh, it's terrifying to even think about.
It is, it is. And Alice, Kay's mother, she was pinned under some debris, couldn't reach her.
Oh,
She was trapped.
gosh, knowing your child is somewhere in all that wreckage, it doesn't bear thinking about.
No, it doesn't.
So what happened?
Well, it's a testament to a mother's love. Even in that moment, Alice's biggest worry was finding Kay.
Uh,
Thankfully, though, Kay's siblings, they were safe. They were under a veranda.
oh,
They were running late for school that day, and that little twist of fate might have actually saved their lives.
that's incredible. A stroke of luck amidst all that horror.
Yeah, it is.
What about Billy Wells, the firefighter?
Yeah.
We left him racing toward the harbor right before the explosion.
Right.
What happened to him?
His story is almost unbelievable. The blast wave, it actually blew him right off his fire truck,
Oh my God.
ripped his clothes right off, and left him lying there in the street, badly injured.
Oh, that's awful.
Mhm.
And in all that chaos, what did he do?
He got up.
He did.
He did. He stumbled through the wreckage, just driven by this incredible sense of duty to help others.
Wow.
He finds these two kids crying in the street, totally lost and terrified.
Oh, gosh.
And this man who's just survived this unimaginable explosion, he helps them, guides them to safety before finally collapsing from exhaustion.
It's such a powerful story of human resilience.
It is.
It makes you wonder what pushed him to do that.
I think it speaks to something deep inside us humans, this drive to help others, even when we're suffering ourselves. It's like the scale of the disaster just unleashed this wave of compassion.
I could see that.
Yeah. And it wasn't just Billy Wells, There are so many stories of people helping each other, sharing whatever food and shelter they had left, working tirelessly to rescue those trapped under the rubble.
It's really inspiring.
It is. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, communities can come together, show incredible strength and kindness.
So as the initial shock started to fade, the city was left to deal with the devastating aftermath.
Right.
The scale of the damage it's almost impossible to grasp.
It was a scene of total devastation.
Yeah.
Over 1,600 people died instantly in the blast,
Yeah.
and another 400 died from their injuries in the days that followed.
Those numbers they're just staggering.
They are.
And we can't forget about the thousands who were injured, right?
Right.
So many with horrible burns, shrapnel wounds, broken bones.
It's true. The explosion also caused over 1,000 cases of permanent blindness,
Wow.
the largest mass blinding in Canadian history.
It's hard to imagine the physical and emotional toll on those who survived. But as the city started to dig out from under the rubble, another challenge emerged, didn't it?
It did. A blizzard hit just hours after the explosion.
Oh, talk about adding insult to injury.
I know, right? This blizzard, it just blanketed the city in snow and ice, making rescue efforts 1,000,000 times harder.
Oh, gosh.
Roads were impassable, communication lines were down, and the freezing temperatures, they just added to the suffering of those who had lost their homes.
It's almost unimaginable facing that level of devastation and then having to deal with a blizzard on top of it.
It is. It's hard to fathom.
So as the city struggled to cope with this immediate crisis, the investigation into what caused the explosion, it got underway.
Right.
What did they find out?
Well, at first they focused on the crews of both ships. There were accusations of speeding, ignoring shipping lanes, and not properly signaling the dangerous cargo on board the Mont Blanc.
Oh, wow.
It quickly became clear that a whole series of errors and miscommunications had led to this tragedy.
It sounds like a chain reaction of mistakes, each one making the next one worse.
Exactly.
So what were the main mistakes, would you say?
Well, the Emo was going way too fast in a narrow channel, and the Mont Blanc, they didn't communicate clearly enough about what they were carrying,
Right.
which meant that nobody on shore took the necessary precautions, like, to avoid a collision or to evacuate the area.
Knowing what we know now about how dangerous that cargo was,
Yeah.
it's hard to believe there wasn't a better system for communicating that kind of risk.
It is. It is. It's a tragic reminder of how seemingly small oversights can have catastrophic consequences.
Yeah.
And of course, the secrecy around the wartime cargo, that played a role too.
So with all the evidence pointing to human error, did anyone face criminal charges for the disaster?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
The case, it went all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court.
Wow.
And in the end, both ships were found equally at fault for the collision. But even with the scale of the tragedy, no criminal charges were ever filed.
That's surprising.
It is.
I mean, you'd think someone would be held accountable for such a devastating event.
Yeah, but it's complicated.
Okay.
The court, they recognized that the situation was incredibly chaotic.
Mm.
And while there was negligence involved, it was hard to pinpoint specific individuals whose actions directly caused the explosion. It was more like a system failure, a series of unfortunate events that just came together in the worst possible way.
So a perfect storm, in a way.
You could say that.
So as the legal battles died down, Halifax began the long and difficult process of rebuilding.
Yeah.
But the impact of the explosion, it went way beyond just physically rebuilding the city, didn't it?
It did. The Halifax explosion actually became a catalyst for major advances in a lot of fields, especially medicine.
That's fascinating. And that's where we'll pick up our deep dive in part 3. We'll explore the lasting legacy of the Halifax explosion and how it shaped the world we live in today. So we've talked about the devastation in Halifax, right? And the incredible resilience of the people. But as we move further away from, those first few days after the explosion, I'm really curious about those lasting impacts you mentioned, especially in medicine.
Right.
It's amazing to think that this tragedy could actually lead to, positive changes.
Well, it's a really powerful example of how we as humans can be so creative when we're faced with huge challenges.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of the disaster in Halifax, it forced doctors to deal with injuries and situations they'd never seen before. They had to improvise, adapt, and come up with new ideas on the spot.
And those innovations, they didn't just disappear over time, did they?
No, not at all. The things they learned in Halifax, they had this ripple effect throughout the whole medical world. Like, take ophthalmology, for example. Over 1,000 people lost their sight permanently because of flying debris.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to deal with that many casualties at once.
It was overwhelming for the medical community, but it also pushed them to make huge strides in how they treated eye injuries. For example, there was this pioneering eye doctor, Dr. George Cox. He was really important in setting up a special eye clinic in Halifax just to care for the survivors.
So they basically created this center of excellence because they had to.
Exactly. And Dr. Cox's work in Halifax, it led to new surgical techniques for corneal transplants.
Oh, wow.
Which are now, standard practice all over the world for treating eye injuries and diseases.
That's incredible. So this one horrible event in Halifax ended up changing how we treat eye injuries everywhere.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond just ophthalmology. They had to treat these really complex wounds and burns, which led to big advances in reconstructive surgery. Surgeons, they had to come up with new ways to do skin grafts, clean wounds, and deal with infections.
It's kind of the silver lining, I guess. Out of so much suffering came knowledge and techniques that are still helping people today.
It really is. And the Halifax explosion, it also had a profound impact on how we understand and treat psychological trauma.
Right, that makes sense. We talked about the emotional scars left by the explosion, especially for people like Kay McLeod, who carried those vivid memories with her for her whole life.
Yeah.
It must have been really tough.
Back then, what we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it wasn't really understood.
Right.
But with so many people in Halifax having nightmares, flashbacks, and just crippling anxiety, doctors had to face this invisible wound head on.
So they had to find ways to treat it, not just ignore it.
Exactly. Doctors in Halifax started trying out new therapies, focusing on talk therapy and emotional support.
Okay.
Their work, it really helped to lay the groundwork for the more comprehensive ways we treat PTSD today.
It's amazing to think about how this one event had such a ripple effect, impacting everything from eye surgery to mental health treatment. But beyond the medical advancements, what other lasting effects did the Halifax explosion have?
Well, it also made cities all over the world rethink how they prepared for disasters.
Yeah.
Halifax was totally caught off guard, and then that blizzard just made everything worse.
It really showed how important it is to have a coordinated response system, right?
Absolutely. After the explosion, Halifax put in and came up with stronger plans for evacuations and helping survivors.
So they used this tragedy to make sure they'd be better prepared if something like that ever happened again, which hopefully it won't.
Yeah, I hope not either.
But they learned from it.
Exactly. And those lessons, they weren't just for Halifax.
Yeah.
Cities around the world looked at what happened there and adopted similar measures to improve their own disaster preparedness plans.
It's a reminder that we can learn from even the most terrible events and use what we learn to create a safer future.
It is. It really
I
is.
think that's a really key takeaway from the Halifax explosion.
Yeah.
It's a story of incredible tragedy, but it's also a story of human resilience, ingenuity, and the amazing power of community.
I agree.
It makes you wonder what other lessons from history we might be missing. What events, whether they're big or small, could hold insights that could help us solve problems we're facing today?
That's a great question to think about. Maybe the Halifax explosion can remind us to always look for the lessons, even when things are really bad.
Yeah.
Because our ability to innovate and to be compassionate, it often shines the brightest when we're going through tough times.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
I think so too.
It's not just a history lesson, it's a testament to how we can find hope and make progress even in the face of unimaginable loss.
Absolutely.
I really hope everyone listening will take some time to reflect on what we've discussed and think about how these lessons might apply to our world today.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.